It was one of those rare Saturdays that actually felt earned. The world was quiet, just the hum of the pool filter, the golden slant of the afternoon sun, and the sharp, satisfying crack of a cold beer can. I was floating, eyes closed, letting the tension of a 20-year career in public service dissolve into the chlorine. Then came the scrape of sneakers on concrete, high-end, designer sneakers. I opened one eye. A kid, maybe 17, stood at the edge of my pool. He was wearing clothes that cost more than a month of my mortgage and a smirk sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't look like he was lost. He looked like he was conducting an inspection. "Hey, old man," he said. The disrespect was practiced, polished. I said, "You need to get out." I didn't move. I just watched him, the water rippling around my shoulders. "You did say that. I heard you the first time. I'm just curious why you think your opinion on my afternoon schedule matters." He scoffed, crossing his arms. "This isn't an opinion. This is a violation. My mom runs this neighborhood. She's the HOA president. And she said this pool area is restricted until the board completes the recreational audit. So, beat it." The arrogance was almost impressive. It was the kind of borrowed power you only see in people who have never had to bleed for anything they own. I took a slow sip of my beer, studying him over the rim of the can. If this kid had even the slightest inkling of who he was talking to or what I'd spent the last 2 decades doing for the state, he would have been halfway down the block by now. "Is that right?" I asked, my voice staying at a low, conversational level. "Well, tell your mom that Michael Reeves says the water is fine. And maybe tell her to check the property lines again. It'll save everyone a lot of paperwork." His smirk faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine anger. He pulled out his phone. "Fine. Have it your way. You're going to regret being a smartass when the cops show up." "I'll be right here," I said, closing my eye again. "Try not to trip on your way out." Let me back up a bit. Let me tell you how we got to this particular Saturday. But first, do me a favor. Tell me where you're watching this from and what time it is. I'm always curious how far a story like this reaches, especially when it involves people who think they own the dirt you walk on. 6 months ago, I moved into Willowbrook Estates. It was the kind of suburb that looked like a brochure for the American dream. Manicured lawns, pastel mailboxes, and polite waves from neighbors that never quite reached their eyes. I wanted quiet. I wanted a place where the most dangerous thing I encountered was a faulty sprinkler head. I didn't tell anyone what I did for a living. In a neighborhood like this, senior investigator for the state attorney's office is a title that tends to kill the vibe at a barbecue. I just told them I worked in public service. Technically true. On day 3, Karen Mitchell arrived. She was exactly what you're picturing. Perfect posture, designer yoga pants, and a smile that felt like a threat wrapped in powdered sugar. She handed me a basket of lemon muffins and a 47-page HOA packet bound in a plastic spine. "I'm Karen, the HOA president," she said, her eyes already scanning my driveway, my truck, and the stack of boxes in my garage. "We take a lot of pride in our community standards here, Michael. We like things uniform." "Uniformity is great for North Korean parades, Karen," I replied, giving her a dry smile. "I'm more of a mind-my-own-business kind of guy." The smile didn't move, but her eyes went cold. "We find that those who mind their own business often forget the rules that protect us all. For instance, your moving truck blocked a neighbor's egress for 20 minutes yesterday. Consider this a friendly warning. Citations come fast in Willowbrook." By the end of my first week, I had 3 warning letters in my mailbox. One for my trash bins being out 15 minutes past the pickup window. One for my grass being half an inch over the approved height. And one containing a helpful discount code for an HOA-approved landscaping company. I didn't get angry. I got observant. It's a professional habit. I started noticing the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, a 70-year-old widow across the street, spent her mornings frantically trimming her rose bushes with trembling hands. Tom Johnson, a guy who looked like he'd been chewed up by a corporate machine, would literally dive into his house if he saw Karen's white SUV rounding the corner. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a panopticon. And Karen was the warden. Then there was Brandon, Karen's 17-year-old son. He drove a black BMW with a modified exhaust that sounded like a chainsaw in a trash can. He'd tear through the 25 mph zones at 50, blasting bass that rattled the windows of every house. When he wasn't speeding, he was parking sideways across guest spots or loitering on people's lawns. Whenever anyone, usually a brave soul like Marcus Webb, a single dad from 2 doors down, tried to ask him to slow down, Brandon would just roll down the window and sneer. "My mom runs this neighborhood, man. Go cry about it in the next meeting." Karen ruled with paperwork. Brandon ruled with noise. Together, they made sure no one forgot who held the leash. The first HOA meeting I attended was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Karen sat at the head of the community center room like a high court judge. She didn't answer questions. She corrected them. "Why was the pool maintenance fee hiked by 20% when the heater hasn't worked since June?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. Karen adjusted her glasses, peering at him with pity. "Marcus, if you'd read the fiscal transparency report, which I know is a lot of big words, you'd see that the funds were diverted to aesthetic security. If you can't afford the dues, there are plenty of apartment complexes in the next town over that might suit your budget better." The room went silent. People actually looked at their shoes. It was the kind of systematic bullying that only works when everyone is too afraid to be the next target. That night, I went home and did what I always do when I find a bad actor. I started a file, not because I wanted to be the neighborhood hero, but because arrogance like Karen's is almost always a mask for something much uglier. People who crave that much control over their neighbors' lawns are usually trying to distract from what's happening in their own ledgers. I installed a few discreet, high-definition cameras. I started logging every fine I received. I started talking to the neighbors, not as a friend, but as an interviewer. Mrs. Patterson broke first. She came over with a casserole, but her eyes were red. "She fined me $500, Michael," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She said my porch light was the wrong temperature of white. I told her I couldn't afford it this month because of my heart medication, and she told me that health choices shouldn't compromise community aesthetics." I felt that familiar, cold spark in the back of my brain, the one that usually happens right before I lead a raid. "Do you have the letter, Mrs. Patterson?" I asked softly. She did. She had all of them. So did Marcus. So did the Johnsons. As I scanned their documents, a pattern emerged. The fines weren't being paid to a standard HOA escrow account. They were being directed to a Management Oversight LLC. I did a quick search on the Secretary of State's database. The LLC was registered to a P.O. box. The authorized signer? Karen Mitchell. It wasn't just abuse of power. It was a racket. Which brings us back to the pool. 10 minutes after Brandon stormed off, the gate to my backyard didn't just open, it slammed. Karen Mitchell marched in like she was leading a cavalry charge. She had her phone out, recording, and she was wearing her official HOA blazer over her yoga gear. "Mr. Reeves," she barked, "I have been informed by a resident and a member of my own household that you are not only trespassing on communal property, but also using threatening language toward a minor." I didn't get out of the pool. I just floated there, looking up at her. "Trespassing is a very specific legal term, Karen. Are you sure you want to use it?" "This pool is HOA property," she shrieked, her mask finally slipping. The polite general was gone. The tyrant was front and center. "We issued a stay-away order for this section due to the audit. You are in violation of Section 1(2.4). Get out now." I stood up slowly, the water cascading off my shoulders. I saw Brandon standing behind her, his phone held high, recording the victory. "Actually," I said, walking toward the steps, "I checked my deed when I moved in. This lot, Lot 42, includes the entirety of the pool structure and the 3 feet of concrete surrounding it. It's not communal. It's mine. Your audit map is a fabrication, likely drawn up to justify the maintenance fees you've been embezzling. The silence that followed was heavy. Karen's face went from flushed red to a ghostly, sickly white. You don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "I have the records." "I'm sure you do," I said, stepping onto the deck and grabbing my towel. I didn't look at her. I looked right into Brandon's camera. "And I'm sure the state auditor will be very interested in those records, along with the management oversight LLC you've been using to fund that BMW in your driveway." "You're crazy," Brandon chimed in, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "Mom, tell him." Karen didn't tell me anything. She turned on her heel and marched out, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete. She thought she was retreating to regroup. She thought she could bury me in more paperwork.